Good evening, everybody, and thank you for being here. I want to welcome you. I'm Tom Hogan, the coordinator of the Milwaukie Poetry Series. So thank you for being here at the Ledding Library here in Milwaukie. I also want to welcome those of you who have logged in on the live stream. So thank you for being here. I know I say that we know that you have other things that you could be doing. So we're happy that you're here tonight. We're logged in and reading poetry. So thank you for that. I also want, before we go further, because we're in the holiday season, to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays from us here at the Poetry Series and the library. So Happy Holidays to everybody. I have some thanks, too, I want to make. So thanks first to the city of Milwaukie, because I was talking a little earlier about how we got started. So we're in our 18th season, and we got started with a grant that we wrote to the Milwaukie Arts Alliance, and they funded it, which we were delighted about. So we were able to start the series. And then the city of Milwaukie the next year picked it up, and we're supportive of it, and they have been supportive of it right from the beginning. So we are very grateful about that and the support from the city. At the time, I was on the library board, and so we have had support from the Ledding Library all of this time. Initially, we were at the Pond House for a number of years, so now we're here in this lovely new library that is something that we were talking about. Actually, we talked about at the very first board meeting I went to, that's 20 years ago, that it would be nice to have a new library. And so we have a new library, which is really absolutely wonderful. So we thank the Ledding Library. We also thank the Poetry Committee. We have a Milwaukie Poetry Series committee, and Kristen is here. So she's already standing. So we're both standing. And let's give Kristen a hand and the Poetry Series. And we have our board. Our board is not here, but as you know, you don't have something happen unless you have people working on it. So thank you for that. And finally, thanks to the Willamette Falls Media Studio. Our tech person tonight is Josh Reynolds. Josh is back here with the headphones on, and so he's the one that makes this all happen. And Josh is a magician. So thanks to a hand for Josh. A couple of things that you can take with you. We do have a broadside of one of Kristen's poems. So please, if you don't have a copy of that, I think Kristen is going to pass one out. Please take one with you. We also have a flyer, which is for the readings that we have. We are a season. Our season is September through July. And our next poet is going to be Laura Winter. Laura Winter is going to be here in January. So if you would like to take one of these with you, please do that. That's what they're for. A couple of things about future events that I did want to say something about. So Laura Winter is going to be our January reader, who will be here January 8th. That's the second Wednesday in January. And then we are going to have, and have sponsored for many years, we are going to have a William Stafford birthday celebration. And that's going to be on the second Saturday, which is the 11th. And there'll be an invitation out for that. But that's going to be 3 to 5. That will be also here in this room at the library. So make a note of that. I've been looking forward to this. So let me introduce our poet tonight. Chris Anderson is an emeritus professor of English at Oregon State University and a Catholic deacon. He's written a number of books, poetry and prose, including Light When It Comes, Trusting Joy, Facing Darkness, and Seeing God in Everything, 2016. His new book of poetry, Love Calls Us Here, was published this summer by Wild House Press in Boston. He and his wife Barb have lived for many years on the edge of the university research forest north of Corvallis, where they walk every day with their 2 dogs. They have 3 children and 2 grandchildren. I got a chance to talk a little bit to Chris before the reading. It's very nice to meet him, very nice to have him here. would you join me in welcoming our poet for this evening, Chris Anderson? Oh, and I forgot to hold up my cell phone, so please silence your telephonic devices, if you would.
Well, I've been really looking forward to this very much. I think this is the classiest poetry series around. I really do. And there have been a lot of really great poets. So it's good to be in their company. Poets I admire and friends of mine, including Lex Runciman, Donna Henderson. Last month you had Jen Richter, a former colleague of mine at Oregon State. And Karen Holmberg. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm just grateful that you've let me be a part of it. So thank you very much. What I want to do is read about a dozen poems from this new book, Love Calls Us Here. And then I want to read some new poems in the rest of my time tonight. The theme of my new book is stated right up front in the epigraph from the great 20th century Carmelite mystic Ruth Burroughs. She died, in fact, just last November, at the age of 100. And she says this: "Divine love meets us in the real world and nowhere else. In this moment, this person." All the poems in the book try to talk about moments like that. A lot of those moments come out of my experience as a Catholic deacon, but I don't think you have to be Catholic or have to be a deacon or even believe in God in order to have those moments. I think we all have those moments, however we name them or interpret them. And I think that's what poetry is for. That's what poetry does. It points to those moments. It helps us see those moments, remember those moments. Here are the first three poems of Love Calls Us Here. I'll just read them one after the other. Driving at night. Driving at night on the way to Spokane, I see a stadium in a little town, and the lights of the stadium pouring into the darkness. I am passing by. I know that within me there is a great love, and everywhere, all around me. I can't hear them, but I know that everyone is cheering. To believe is to remember. Someone in Reader's Digest said to stop and live each moment before it slips away. I was 9 or 10, swinging on a rope from a branch of what must have been an oak, bumping into the trunk with my feet and pushing off again. And I stopped, and I dangled in the cold, wintry air. And I looked at the bark, wrinkly and gray like an elephant's skin, and at the ridges in the bark, and at the channels the ridges made. I thought, remember this. Geese. We were having Mass on a hill above a bay. This was after a storm, and through the windows the rain still glistened on the alder. And at just the moment of the consecration, as the bread was becoming the body of Christ, a great flock of geese came clamoring over us, honking and clattering. It must have been enormous. We could almost hear the words. I sent Geese to a magazine, and they accepted it, but they asked me if I would be open to revising that last line. What I had sent them was, the flock must have been enormous. We almost couldn't hear the words. But they suggested the way it is now. It must have been enormous. We almost could hear the words. And that is way better. That opens the poem up. Poetry, Stanley Kunitz says, is a form of spiritual testimony. And I think he means that in the broadest sense, Stanley Kunitz. Poetry, he says, comes in the form of a blessing. So here are two of the deacon poems, two of the poems that come out of my experience as a deacon. Double Wide. Patty and Joe's double wide was weathered and worn, and when I walked in, it felt like home. Joe was glad to see me, smiling through his crooked teeth. The coffee pot sputtered on the cluttered countertop. The night before, he'd left a message on my phone that he was so lonesome for Patty, he thought he might blow his friggin' brains out. But the thing about short-term memory loss is that every day starts anew. I'll never forget the day I married them, that sweet old widow and that lonely, battered man. Patty wore a simple print dress, Joe a straw cowboy hat with a feather in the band. We were standing by the tabernacle in the front of church and taking Patty's hand and looking into her eyes, Joe said haltingly, "Ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough, ain't no river wide enough." The nurse and the child. I was at the mall when the hospital called. The old men circling in their trainers, and the weary mothers in their sadness, and the children, vacant stores, dark behind their grills. The baby lay in a bassinet among the monitors and tubes, next to her mother's bed, wrapped so tightly you could only see her tiny, wizened face. And the mother reached across the railing and wept. And the father stood beside her, and the nurse in her scrubs weeping too. But the baby never flinched when I tried to pour a little water on her head. It spilled from her brow and ran down her cheeks. And the nurse came and knelt and, folding a paper towel, gently wiped it away. This is the title poem. Love calls us here. We spent the day at the beach and went out to eat. But the restaurant was crowded and they had to seat us at the bar. And as we waited, we watched the bartender, a young woman, running back and forth, trying to keep up with her orders. And there was a man at the bar, an old man, drinking by himself. And when she asked as she hurried by how he was doing, he said this was the day his wife had died, the year before, and this was her favorite place. And I remember now how the bartender turned and put down her tray and went over and talked with that old man for a moment. How she listened. And in my mind, her kindness and the old man's grief and the mystery of death And all the stories and the sadness in that crowded place seem to rise up and come together. And it's a warm summer night, and the sun is setting on the water, and the bright waves are coming in and going out, darkening as they break. I was an English professor, as Tom mentioned, at Oregon State for 34 years, which seems unbelievable to me now. I've been retired for 4 years, which seems even more unbelievable. And I've been a deacon for 27 years, and I just retired from active ministry last month. And for those of you who don't know what Catholic deacons do, Catholic deacons hatch, match, and dispatch, baptize, marry, and bury, and preach, and serve at Mass, and visit the sick and the dying, and bless people, and bless things, bless animals, bless fields. Most people don't believe in organized religion anymore. That's what everyone says. That's what everyone says. And I really get that. I really do. It's how I feel about half the time. Although I can assure you that it's not really that organized behind the scenes. You'd be amazed at how bumbling and chaotic things really are. But it's as a deacon in this deeply flawed, very human institution that again and again I have been called into these moments of beauty and of sadness or joy, quiet moments. This is what I mean by the title of the book. It's something that Beatrice says to Virgil at the beginning of the Divine Comedy. Dante is wandering around in the dark wood. He's lost. He's in trouble, and Beatrice sees that in paradise, and she comes all the way down to Limbo, where the Roman poet Virgil is. And she asks Virgil to guide Dante out of the dark wood and down through the inferno and up the mountain of purgatory to the earthly paradise, where Beatrice will come and take Dante the rest of the way. And this is what Beatrice says to Virgil in all high courtesy. Love called me here. It's what people don't understand about the Divine Comedy, that it's a love poem. You just have to go through hell first. I think we're all called by love. We are all called by love in one way or another. And we are called here into the real world, as Burroughs puts it, into our own lives. My dog ate my rosary. Wasn't malicious. He just did it, cracking the olive wood beads like nuts, swallowing others. He didn't eat it all. The crucifix remains, and a few of the beads. And he didn't eat the silver chain, the real silver chain. This was expensive. I bought it in Rome. It was blessed by the Pope. It was the rosary I would be buried with, the clerk said, in her heavily accented English. But that's not how things are. In the mornings now, when I let Bumble out, I find beads all over the yard. Prayers are everywhere. This poem obviously rests on a joke, but a joke is a serious thing in its way. William Stafford famously said that poetry is a serious joke. And I think what he means is that in a poem, the high is always brought low. The abstract is made concrete. The divine becomes human. There's a sudden shift, this surprise. God is always a surprise, Pope Francis says. You never know where and how you will find him. Why I like prayer. Because there's not a lot to do. I just sit and look out the window. Sometimes I light a candle. Sometimes I fall among thorns. Sometimes there's a spring of living water within me, welling up onto eternal life. I feel the weight of my body. I feel the weight of the world. I remember the snow in Montana and playing in the snow. And that blur beside me is Taco, our dog. I am smiling, and my brothers are with me. And we love our mother so much, so very much. A few more poems from the book, and then some new poems. Here's another pairing. Poems that I think speak to each other from the book. Misreading Darwin, which is based on my reading of this wonderful 2-volume biography of Charles Darwin by Janet Brown. Misreading Darwin. When I say that Darwin wasn't an atheist, I just mean that he seems like such a nice man. He was shy. He was sad. He was flatulent. That's why he always excused himself after dinner. He spent 8 years studying barnacles, everything about them, until he was the world's expert on barnacles, all the different kinds, with their hard shells and soft, creamy bodies. He loved to walk in the garden, admiring the trees, but only at the appointed time. His house was the ship and his wife the captain, and he the voyager, alone with his thoughts every day, filling page after page. The children told time by the creak of his door, though they were always racing in too, stealing a rock or a feather. And he let them. And sometimes he talked to them or took them in his arms and kissed them on their ears. And when his little Annie died, he so forgot himself. In a letter to a friend, he called her a little angel. An angel. He just couldn't believe she was gone. He just wasn't thinking. Darwin, of course, was an atheist, a very principled atheist. And here's the poem I want to pair with that. What happens at Mass? What happens at Mass is that a single point explodes into a billion pieces. And the pieces fly away at incredible speeds. And they become atoms, then gases, then stars and planets. And on one planet, amoebas appear. And the amoebas become fish, and the fish become dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs become monkeys and dogs. Everything is always becoming something else, until finally the universe comes to consciousness of itself, and we're standing there looking around thinking, wow, this is really beautiful. This is really sad. When Jesus appears in the flesh, we don't recognize him at first. We think he's the gardener. An old man and an old woman walk down the breezeway with a baby. They must be in their 70s, maybe their 80s. The old man is bow-legged and wearing jeans. He looks like he's worked his whole life. The old woman has wrapped a shawl around her head and swaddled the baby, but it's the old man who is holding the baby as they walk. She is 4 months old, they tell me. Her name is Alice Rose. You baptized her, the old woman says, smiling, a couple of months ago. The baby's head is smooth and soft, and there is a band around it. and on the band in the center of her forehead, there is a little white rose made of cloth. What happens at Mass is that I keep watching the old man as he sits in the pew, looking down at the baby and smiling, rocking her in his arms. I believe God is present in every ordinary moment of our lives, between the lines, or something is. A beauty, a tenderness. We can always only glimpse it. I mean, maybe it's not there at all. Maybe I'm just making it up. I'm not sure. But sometimes I feel it. Sometimes I know it, or I almost know it. I wish I really believed it. In this quest to find God in all things, Pope Francis says, there is still an area of uncertainty. There must be. This is all Pope Francis. If you were in any doubt about where I'm coming from, I think the cat's out of the bag now. There's still an area of uncertainty. There must be. If a person says that he met God with total certainty and is not touched by some margin of uncertainty, then this is not good. If one has the answers to all the questions, that is proof that God is not with him. Pope Francis is pretty good. He's pretty good. Smart guy. Scythes. An old woman hired us to scythe a vacant lot beneath a tall white billboard. Rusty scythes with wooden handles, dry weeds and dry grass, and the sound a scythe makes, and the leaping of grasshoppers, and the sun beating down, and the cars rushing by. The dark stilts the billboard rose on smelled of creosote. Lunchtime, she brought us sandwiches, spam on white bread with ketchup, wrapped in aluminum foil. And we straightened our backs and thank you, ma'am. I'll never forget that sandwich, that morning. What I can't remember is what the billboard said. Religions start, Frederick Buechner says, the way Frost says poems do, with a lump in the throat, to put it mildly. Everything else, Buechner says, religion as dogma, as ethics, as institution, all that comes later, and in the long run counts for less. The sea on Colville Mountain. Dad always said he put the sea on Colville Mountain, and he did when he was student body president in 1948. I drove up to Colville and found the story at the town museum, stuck in a forgotten file. He led the group that whitewashed rocks and laid them out on top in a giant half circle. It was his idea. Later, a group from town raised a huge white cross above the sea, 40 feet high. And as you come around the bend from Chewelah, by the barn that has always been falling down, you can still see them both from miles away, white as chalk. The cross and the sign my father left me. I've been writing a lot of new poems lately. I'm working on a new manuscript. And in the time I have left tonight, I want to share a few of my new poems. And in fact, the poem I just read about Colville Mountain, about the sea in that mountain, is one of those new poems. I thought it would be a good transition. A lot of these new poems, my new poems, have to do with history, with what did or didn't happen. And I didn't notice that at first. I mean, it really surprised me. They often mention documents, pieces of paper, certificates, or artifacts or some kind of historical evidence. There are a lot of dates and numbers in them. That really surprised me. And they're all kind of coming together into this new book that right now I'm calling Sources. But really, I'm writing about the same thing I always write about. I'm writing about the same thing I wrote about in Love Calls Us Here. You know, I think I just have one thing to say, and I keep trying to say it over and over again. I'm just writing one poem over and over again, and I just can't seem to get it right. I'm really interested in history suddenly. I consider it the most amazing thing one can do with one's life, Laurie Siegel says, to find out what has actually happened. Do you know Laurie Siegel? I'd not heard of her. It's L-O-R-E, Lore Siegel. She just died a couple of months ago in her late 90s. I'm really interested in writing by women who are 100 or close to 100. I consider it the most amazing thing to do with one's life, to find out what has actually happened. Or I would add, to find out you can never really find out. Here's a sequence of 3 of those new poems on that theme. On remembering I have something signed by Richard Nixon. I come across it in an old cardboard box. My Eagle Scout certificate. The president's signature stamped in blue. I had forgotten. But innocence is never lost. We can feel that way again, joyous, midsummer, scattering hay beneath the ski lift on Mount Spokane, and the sweet smell of hay, and far blue valleys rolling beneath us. Gliding a canoe across the little Pend Oreille, evening, the dark water like glass, and kissing Gail Hamilton as we stood in the rain. Listen, the earth is the earth, the sky the sky. The eagle has landed, sweeping first over the craters and rocks before finally setting down. Certificate of recognition. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, is walking toward us, leading a flock of happy sheep. His robes are flowy and white, and his eyes are kind, and he has come to recognize my faithful participation at Vacation Bible School. My teacher, Velma Sutton, has signed at the bottom. And our pastor, Pastor Thomas, June 6th, 1961. The paper faded now, foxing with age. My mother was so afraid. The prairie surrounded her with the vastness of prairies and the emptiness. Excuse me, I'm not choked up. Well, maybe I'm a little choked up. Here, let me start that stanza again. June 6, 1961. The paper faded now, foxing with age. My mother was so afraid. The prairie surrounded her with the vastness of prairies and the emptiness. And sometimes the wind came howling, rattling all the doors. I tried so hard to be good. But Jesus, the Good Shepherd, is walking toward us. And he is gentle and wise. And the meadow is green, and the sky a milky blue. In his arms he holds a little lamb that once was lost and now is found. Reunion. The man at the reunion crouches by my chair, slightly drunk. I don't remember him. He was running behind me, he says, the day I won the All-City B Squad 100-yard dash, the only race I ever won. I was usually on varsity, but I'd been banished that week, and I felt so free. You were flying, he says. You ran a 10-2. I heard them call it. I've been telling this story for years, but I always say a 10-3, and I thought I just made it up. Who knows? Who knows what that man really heard long ago? Who knows what is true? Dave always won on varsity, arms thrown back, chest out. He could run a 10-1, a 10 flat. He was an arrow. I was always second or third at best, a step or more behind, 10-7, 10-8, grasping at air. I could never reach him. He was the one I most wanted to see. I wanted to tell him how I felt, who I was. But he died just before the reunion. A loving father and grandfather, the obituary said, at home now with the Lord. I was always a step or more behind. Faith is the evidence of things unseen. Did I say you ran a 10-2 at the beginning? Ran a 10-2, not a 10-3? It's really important to me. Those tenths, you don't think they make a big difference? They do. 10-2. I don't believe it, but that's what he said. Then it became 10-3, and what's true and what isn't? There's a mystery here too, in the past as well as in the present. In fact, the moments are always in the past because they go by too fast. We can only recover them in memory. The title of the second poem I read, To Believe is to Remember, is actually, this is my third time quoting Pope Francis, from something he says. He says, the believer is essentially one who remembers, which is very Augustinian too, that you recollect, you recover what has happened in memory. But you have to believe 10-3, 10-7, 10-8, at home with the Lord. One more poem. I've been experimenting with a different kind of poem, longer and looser and more homiletic. And I wanted to end by sharing one tonight. A homiletic poem. I did this just for you. By now, I hope you know that I'm not trying to convert you. I'm sharing this as a poem. I've never shared one of these poems before, probably for a good reason. And I just want to see how it plays. I just want to see how it sounds and feels to me, and if it works as a poem. And before I read it, I want to thank you for coming and for being willing to listen to me for so long. Catholics have very short attention spans. A Mass has to be over in an hour. Apparently, that's one of the laws that Moses brought down from the mountain. And that means the homily has to be 10 minutes. And if it's longer than 10 minutes, boy, you hear about it. So 40 minutes, that's a long time. Let me see, I've been timing myself because I'm afraid that the pastor's going to be, or somebody from the parish is going to say, wait a minute, that was 11 minutes. So in any way that makes sense to you, I offer you my blessing. I'm actually pretty nervous about this. Probably no big deal. There was a guy in the parish for a long time, whenever I preached, he would stand up and walk out. And then when I was finished, he'd come back in. And he always sat in the front row. So it won't offend me. It'll hurt my feelings, but it won't offend me. This world, on the solemnity of Christ, the King of the universe, November 24th, 2024. I am the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord, the one who is and who was and who is to come. Pilate said to Jesus, "Are you the King of the Jews?" Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. The Gospel of John. Every day since our shattering election, the leaves have fallen from our tree. Every day since the wars began in Ukraine and Gaza, the steam has risen from my coffee cup. Bumble has slept at my feet. Sun rises, sun sets. My 4-year-old grandson made this joke. Do you know what would be funny? A baby with glasses on. Jesus says his kingdom is not of this world. Not the world of the bombs and the lies and the things that governments do or try to do, but this world. The world of the sleeping dog. The world of the steaming cup. The Psalms and the Gospels are full of images of destruction and apocalypse and lamentation and grief, full of them. When we lament, we are with God. When we grieve, we are with God. When we are afraid, we are feeling one of the sacred emotions. But of course, this isn't all. Because without promising that the destruction will cease or the suffering disappear, the scriptures speak of a constancy, of an unending presence underneath, a love that flows. The existence of love isn't proven or disproven by the state of the world, but in spite of it, beneath it, above it, outside it, in us. The promise isn't that everything will be all right, but that God will be with us always, even when everything isn't all right. The promise isn't that everything will be all right this very minute, but in the end, maybe thousands of years from now, eons, the vast galaxies spin. The scale is different, unbelievably vast, and yet breathtakingly small. The Alpha and the Omega, the one who is and who was and who is to come. We must act, protest, stand at the barricades, stand in the gaps, face the truth, tell the truth, give money, work for systems, structures, justice, lift up the poor, heal the suffering, weep, cry out, rage. Jesus was crucified. He lost. He failed. He died. He was lied to. He was tortured. He was used for show. Governments used and betrayed him, and they still are. And yet he stood fast. He held his ground. He said, "My kingdom is not of this world." Do you think that Jesus didn't weep? He didn't grieve? He didn't question? He didn't doubt? He was like us in all things except sin. And weeping is not a sin. Grieving is not a sin. Fear and doubt and righteous anger, they are not sins. Don't despair. God is with the little boy in the rubble. God is with the little girl on the border. God is with the woman dying all alone. Do you know what would be funny? A baby with glasses on. Do you know what would be amazing? Someone rising from the dead. Do you know what is beautiful? What is unending? The leaves that fall from the tree. The steam that rises from the cup. This moment. Every moment. So thank you.
Let's give Chris another hand. Thank you very much. So we're going to have a question and answer period. at this point, and Kristen has the microphone. So if you have a question, she'll bring the microphone to you, and wait for her to get there, because we'd like to get the question on the recording, as well as Chris's answer. And then he's going to end it in 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes or so, with a poem. So, and I'm going to start, because I would like to ask you if you could talk to us about your process in writing your latest book. How did that come about?
Writing this newest book.
Yeah, writing the newest book, and yeah, yeah.
I am very much a proponent of the William Stafford advice, when in doubt, lower your standards. So I write very, very quickly. And then if something doesn't seem to work, I just put it in a file and look at it later. Or if something does start to work, I keep working on it. So I write very fast and then revise a lot. Some of the poems in this book are over 10 years old. I started going through my archive when I was retired, and it was just this great pleasure to kind of see where the poems were. I have a prayer and writing routine in the morning. Journaling is one of the ways that I write or pray, and also the way I write. And if a poem starts to come up, I'll just follow that as part of that process. What I write about are those moments where I feel that kind of lump in the throat, or that catch of the breath, when something happens. Like when that nurse came and knelt by that child in the bassinet, when I was doing the emergency. She came and she knelt by that bassinet. It just stayed with me. That's one of the great advantages in some ways of being a deacon, is I get to be in these situations and whoa, that happened, and so I can write about it. Or my friend, saying ain't no mountain high enough. What, that happened? So surprise, things that memories and so on that cause that kind of leap of the heart. And I revise and revise and revise. And I keep all my revisions, even though Lex told me to stop doing that, and he's right. But very often what I'll do is I'll go back to the original. The original needs to be revised. This is the great mystery of life. Can somebody figure this? I wrote this and it came out and it sounded just like me, and I spent all this time trying to sound like somebody else, and I come back and I know it's got to be better. There are a couple of poems I botched in this book because I over-revised them. And there are a couple I should have revised more. So anyway, lower your standards and then revise. Yeah, anyway, that's yeah.
Questions, anyone?
I do. Please talk more about, catch of the breath situations. You're in a situation or in a role where you're put in extraordinary moments in people's lives, for better or for worse. So when you're teaching someone, if you're not in those extraordinary situations, how do you teach them to observe the extraordinary in every day, whether they're in the line at the grocery store? How is that something that you teach someone to do?
Right. Well, yeah, boy, that's a good question. I wouldn't say, I would qualify a few things. I get to be in certain extraordinary moments. We all do at certain points. But it's really the ordinary moments. Part of what was extraordinary about that moment with the baby is that I poured too much water on her head. And what did the nurse do? She folded a paper towel. In some ways, that's a very ordinary moment. Or driving at night, and I see that light coming out of the stadium. So maybe in a sense, if I were talking about this from the point of view of spiritual direction, I know you're not asking that. How come God is not in my life? And I'd say, well, how do you know he isn't? Maybe you need to lower your standards for how God is revealing himself to you.
Go into that.
So there's a technique in our tradition, there are versions of it in others, called the examine, where at the end of each day you think back on those moments in your day when you felt the light, when you felt, sort of the good moments, and you reflect on them. And you say, well, thank you for those moments. And That's very much like what a poet does, right? You carry around a notebook, right? And you write down words or phrases or something happens. And it's ordinary, but somehow, so you just develop this sensitivity. It's hard. You're continually learning that. It's a daily act. But to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. St. Ignatius said, who founded the Jesuits and talks a lot about this process, is that actually the way the Spirit works is like a sponge soaking up water, slowly. And if there's a heavy splash, it's probably not from God. So it's the ordinary. Or wait a minute, I'm going to get even more Catholic right now. The amazing thing about the theology of the Eucharist is not just that the bread and wine become the body and blood, but that the body and blood become bread and wine. They're just this little thing. It's both and. So now I'm starting to get in full deacon mode here. If it was just writing, students want to sound like they're going to college, right? They want to use big words when little words will do. Or they want to write for posterity. And so they're, talking about, I don't know, wizards and so on. Well, just write about something that happened. And that's where free writing comes in. I should talk about free writing. You know about free writing. That's what's the basis of my teaching for all those years at OSU. And to get students to write a lot and write badly, and then I would ask them to turn some of it in, and I would mark the stuff I liked. And it wasn't the stuff they thought was poetic. Don't be poetic. I was a judge for a 4-H poetry contest at the Benton County Fair. Right around the 4th grade, the poems stopped being any good because they were trying to write about the extraordinary. I mean, I'm exaggerating that, but, So free writing. When in doubt, lower your standard. And it's all around. It's all around. Anyway, thank you very much. Should I do the final poem?
Yes.
Are you?
Do the final.
Are you? Okay. I think that's a great idea, by the way. This is the final poem in the book, so it seemed appropriate. What is going on? 100 years ago, the smiling man in the wheelchair wore the same gown his great-grandson is wearing now. It is made of white cotton, softened and yellowed with age, and goes all the way past the baby's toes. The family has been telling stories, but quiets now and gathers around. The mother holds the baby in her arms. The old man is smiling, and his eyes are clear and aware. He knows what is going on. And for a moment, I do too. And I stand at the font and cup the water in my hand. I think we all stand at the font and cup the water in our hands. And of course, it's going to drain out. It goes through our fingers, but it's living water. It's flowed in the past, it's flowing now. Whatever else is, despite all evidence to the contrary, all the violence and stupidity and ugliness in the world, there's still something, I believe, that is sweet. We can't hold on to it, but it's there and it's flowing. And it will flow into the future. Something is going on. Yeah. All right, thank you.
I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been an absolutely delightful reading. Thank you for being here. So it's been a great experience connecting. I told you already that our reader is going to be Laura Winter in January, and a couple of things to let you know about. Chris's books are over here on the table, and my lovely wife is going to be she's selling them, and please see her over there. We do have some refreshments, so please help yourself with the refreshments. It's the holiday season, that's what they're for. If you want to take a couple of cookies, or half cookies, because she cut them up, a couple of cookies, please do that, because that's what they're for. Again, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for Chris.